Good morning. I can't think of a place I would rather be than today. This is my joy, my privilege, and as I've been listening to the incredible choir, to our amazing chancellor, who I think is showing us what leadership looks like when you go into an institution and you actually open it up to figure out how to make it better with the input of everyone in the room. Let's give our chancellor a round of applause. Dr. Brown, thank you for having us here at South. We so appreciate it. And to all the educators who are in the room, this is the place I want to be, because this is actually the future of our country. When I think about education, I think about Dr. King, and I serve on the Education and Labor Committee for the last 4 terms that I've been in Congress. I think about the fact that Dr. King knew that education was critical not only for fulfilling the individual potential of human intelligence, but actually also of character. As early as 1947, Dr. King warned that we are prone, quote, to let our mental life become invaded by legions of half-truths, prejudices, and propaganda. And he identified even then how essential education is for critical thinking. Dr. King was, as we all know, a prescient man from the beginning to the end. Fast forward 2 decades to the end of his life, 1968. He gave that quote, he wrote that quote as part of an essay he wrote on education back in 1947. Fast forward 2 decades now to the year when he died. That year held a lot of similarities to the moment that I find ourselves in today. That year, Dr. King was deep in a months-long organizing fight to support local sanitation workers who were considered, because of the essential work they did, they were considered at the bottom of the scale, people that perhaps nobody else was paying attention to. But Dr. King certainly was. These were some of the most vulnerable and too often reviled workers despite the essential nature of their work. The US was also involved at that time in a brutal war overseas, where our tax dollars funded endless bombs that were killing innocent civilians and families, children. A cynical, corrupt, criminal politician was running for president at that time on a strategy of dividing people by stoking racial resentments and undermining the fabric of our democracy by raising unprecedented sums of money and courting massive corporate donors. This was back in 1968. This was all on the backs of what seemed like a retreat from the very values and principles that Dr. King had been pushing for. Just a few years earlier, it actually seemed to the country as if progress was on the march forward, with Democrats passing historic legislation aimed at lifting up poor and working people, things like the Economic Opportunity Act, the Food Stamp Act, the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act. But now it seemed that the country was regressing. The night before Dr. King was assassinated, he told a crowd of cold, exhausted sanitation workers, he said, "The world around is all messed up. Trouble is in the land, confusion all around. I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. Only when it's dark enough can you see the stars." And just a few months before that, in a sermon, Dr. King reiterated the call to be strong even in times of despair. He said, "We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope." And I love thinking about that finite disappointment and infinite hope, because that's what we need to cultivate in ourselves every minute of every day. It's certainly what's in the Black National Anthem. It's in the songs that we heard today. It's in the speeches that you're listening to. And all the time, and certainly it's necessary in this eerily similar moment to 1968. And with all that we know we're going to face over the coming years. And so as the representative for this district, which is a tremendous privilege and honor to be the first and only South Asian American woman ever elected to the United States House, to be one of only 24 immigrants, naturalized citizens who serve in the United States House, of a district who understands how deeply critical social justice on every level for every community is. There are so many vulnerable people who are suffering across our community, across our country. People who are struggling paycheck to paycheck. We have to be willing to say the P word, poverty. In this deeply rich country, we have 130 million people of low wealth in this country. People who are struggling to make ends meet if their food stamps are cut. Immigrants who have taken care of us in the fields and the hospitals and now face potential mass deportations. Our beautiful trans community who simply want to live their full lives as who they are, like everybody else of us, but are being vilified for that. Workers who see the profits of a tiny few rise even as they labor to do the work of our economy without knowing if they can buy a house. And yes, our young people who desperately need the education, the critical thinking, and the training of character to have the very skills that you all, the educators in the room here, are teaching at the Seattle colleges. Dr. King would want us to come together and refuse to give in to the divisiveness, to the racism, to the xenophobia that is being fueled and spread, to stand up courageously for our most vulnerable communities, for our students, for our workers, and demand what is right, no matter how difficult it may seem in the moment. He would want us to demand of ourselves conscience. Conscience. Just 4 days before he was assassinated, Dr. King said this: cowardice asks the question, is it expedient? And then expedience comes along and asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? And conscience asks the question, is it right? Conscience is what we all need to nurture in ourselves, in our students, in our communities. And I know, unfortunately, that the next 4 years will bring many tests, that it may be neither politic nor expedient, nor without risk, to stand up for what we know to be just, and yet let us remind ourselves that courage is not acting in the absence of fear, it's acting despite fear. So today, let us honor with joy, with appreciation, and with a deep commitment to moving forward Dr. King's legacy by being courageous, by committing ourselves to building that beloved community that we feel right here in this room, where acting for justice is an act of love and deep commitment to the very values that light the way forward, even in darkness. And I want to thank you all for what you do every single day, because I hear from you. I've spoken to you, as Rosie said. I've been here with you. I've wept with you. I know the struggles that are there in your communities and your families. And I want to thank you for still standing up to act for justice. And I am so proud that I will be spending the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, Monday, January 20th, right here at home, feeding the hungry instead of being in Washington, D.C.